Hello guys, tonight we're gonna cover another accident, another L1011 unfortunately, that crashed back in 1972 and gave us again quite a few lessons learned, I can say. The accident is related to an Eastern Airlines L1011 that it was flying from Kennedy to Miami International Airport on the 29th of December 1972. Piloted but very expert captain. Bob Loft has 29, almost 30,000 hours, and it was number 50 in the seniority list in Eastern Airlines. Imagine that, been there for a while. Co-pilot flying at that night was Bert Stockstill, 39 years old pilot, also experienced, but only 306 hours in the jet. And the CM3 flight engineer was Don Ripo, 51 years old, and only 53 hours in the jet. Anyways, very experienced crew overall, flying for a well-known route from Kennedy to Miami International Airport at night. So that's the first factor that we have to consider. I will talk about later on. So the scene itself took off from Kennedy uneventfully and reached descent point without an issue. Went in, and at the time of the approach, at the time that we're actually lowering the landing gear, one of the landing gear light did not lit, meaning that it might not be down, might have a problem with the landing gear itself, or simply the indication was faulty. As a result of that, they interrupted the approach. They aborted the arrival. They positioned themselves in a holding like we do to troubleshoot the problem and just make sure that a safe landing was possible, or dump some fuel to get lighter. You know, all the consideration that we as a crew do at that point, and to minimize the risk, execute any checklist, coordinate with the ground crew in case we have to tell them anything, in particular, a mayday or a pan or anything like that, and prepare the best way possible safely our aircraft for landing. So they established at 2,000 feet after they went around for the first approach, and they positioned themselves in a holding not too far from the airport. I'll show you later on the graph of the plot of the flight. And the captain instructed the flight engineer to go down and in the electronic bay to retrieve a spare bulb to be able to replace it once they established that the bulb was burned, which it was at the end. The flight engineer went down in the EE bay, so-called, to get a spare bulb, and in the meanwhile, this is what happened. Inadvertently, the crew, apparently the first officer in this case, hit the yoke with his knee. So autopilot was engaged, imagine that. And during the holding pattern, pilot flying was first officer, while the captain keyed the radio and coordinated the operation inside, hit with his knee, bumped his knee on the yoke, disengaged the so-called autopilot pitch mode, and reverted into CWS. What's CWS? It's a control with steering mode of the autopilot that allows the pitch to stay that way once we release the control. So let's say we're going level flight, and at some point we pull the stick towards us, we pull it lightly, 10 or 15 degrees nose up, pitch mode, and the aircraft, normally if the autopilot is engaged, it will fight against us, and it will try to reestablish the level flight it was originally established. In this case, CWS does not do that. You pull the stick, the aircraft, let's say, raises its nose slightly, and it will stay like that. So it's a sort of control with steering. It's It's a way of putting the aircraft in a way that stay that way in roll and pitch. And that's what happened. Obviously, the crew did not realize at the time that that would happen because there's no explicit warning except the altitude deviation warning. Because it's not really a warning. If you guys are expert and you've been there, you know it's a sort of a core chime. It goes, it's not really a warning. Plus, on the TriStar, is located in the back of the flight deck, close to the flight engineer station, which unfortunately wasn't there at the time. So the altitude deviation happened going down because the stick was actually pushed forward, and the aircraft started descending slowly with a slight descent rate towards the ground. Captain, he was busy, obviously doing something different. They were all focused, imagine, on that bulb to be replaced. Didn't realize the aircraft was descending dangerously towards the rain. They were not very high, 2,000 feet. It's not a great altitude. And of course, when you have an accident, it's never one thing. It's not that you have one happening causing the whole thing to be destroyed, unless it's a missile or something like that. There were a few factors. The first one I want to point out is the fact that it was night, right? Because during the day you see outside, hey, we're close to the ground, and you just pull out and get out. So that was the very first factor that comes to my mind. Second one is system. So this chime plus the speaker is a bit out of the pilot's ears, so it's not very audible from the pilots. It is, but it's more on the flight engineer area of expertise, let's say down there, back there. And he was not there. The third factor I want to point out is the ATC at the time. They did not have responsibility to advise the crew that they were deviating from an altitude. They could do it as a courtesy, but it wasn't part of their mandatory task as it is this day. This day you deviate from 100 feet, 150 even, and they will shout at you where you're going, what you're doing, what's your altitude, especially in the low side, for your own sake, of course, and the sake of separation with other aircraft. Bottom line, they started sending, and the ATC controller, on top of all that, he was busy with another aircraft. It's a National Airline 607, which also suffered a landing gear problem, for real. He had a jam landing gear. So you can imagine the picture. The crew was busy focused on that landing gear bulb to be replaced. Nobody's flying the aircraft, and all the ATC, which in Miami at the time, they only have one 3D radar, meaning that they can only look at one guy, one area, let's say, and determine the 3D altitude, speed, and position in the airspace. And they didn't focus on the L1011 because it wasn't distress. It was just it was changing a bulb. There was a landing pattern 2000, perfectly stable. Anyways, the ATC controller came back and looked at them and asked them, "Hey, any trouble?" No, we're good. We're just coming in to land. And everything is fine. Unfortunately, that was the case because if you're looking at the path that I'll show you in a minute, in the turn they lost gradually 100, 200, 300 feet until they hit the ground, about 190 knots with the left wing first, and then they crash and burn close to the airport on the Everglades there. So again, as always, we want to learn from the accident. We don't want to blame anybody. We just want to learn. Even though it's been a while, the lessons learned are still valid. The first lesson learned for me out of all this is the simple list, if you want. We always have to, as a crew, as a captain in particular, or pilot flying, you would say, you always have to determine who is at the controls of the aircraft. It might have been autopilot engaged, it doesn't matter, but if there's a pilot who is in charge of the aviate part, he's actually flying, either monitoring the autopilot or flying himself, doesn't matter, but he is the one flying, he's the one who's in charge of all the dynamics on board. You might command the pilot monitoring to do something for him, but he is the one who's flying. We cannot have a situation inside a flight deck where these tasks are not clear. This kills people, and it will kill people, and it has in the past. because I think, oh, he has control, he knows what he's doing, and vice versa. So this is the first lesson learned always. Have somebody in control who's clearly he's in the control and verbalizes it. Evened up, ask, raise your hand and say, hey, you have control, or should I take control? You have the radio. First thing. Second thing is obviously the monitoring. So even if you're not pilot flying, you're still flying. You're in the air. You're not physically conducting the aircraft. You're not physically driving, but you're monitoring the dynamics. So if the pilot flying is distracted or is overloaded or both, pilot monitoring should jump in, has to jump in and say, hey, Captain, is everything okay? Or pilot, is everything okay? Is it everything under control? Or pitch, speed, altitude. Last ditch maneuver is just intervene, take controls, and reestablish a safe dynamic of flight. So this is the third one is do not focus on one thing only, losing focus again on everything else. That doesn't work in aviation. We cannot freeze in the air, stop completely, and do one thing only. It doesn't work like that. The aircraft keeps flying, keeps turning, keeps climbing or descending, decelerating, accelerating, etc., etc., and things happen continuously. So the only thing we can do is just be ahead of the aircraft in terms of looking ahead and determining what's the next step. 2-3 minutes ahead is enough, depending on the speed you're flying, and be able to determine and predict what's the next course of action based on what you see right now. Use your resources. The last one, you got an ATC looking at you, you got a flight engineer, you got an extra pair of eyes that they had on board, the dead-ending guy. Just do it and make sure they help you out. Use all your resources, okay? Especially at that time. I mean, the flying those years was challenging more than it is today in terms of avionics. Situational awareness wasn't the one we have today. Today we're using GPSs, IRSs, we have moving maps, and so forth. So if you got lost today, or if we lose situational awareness airspace-wise, we shouldn't be there. We should do something different, maybe. Okay, so that's my contribution to this cause. I hope you found this useful, informative. Just as a note of, I don't want to say a merry note, because it's nothing happy, nothing merry, nothing is positive when you have a crash. But after this crash, there have been multiple sightings of the crew that was involved in the accident inside some other Eastern Airline TriStar. So and, they even came out with a book about the ghost of the Fly 401. I haven't read it. I just heard of it. Not interested, but what I'm interested is to honor the memory of the brave crew that tried to save the day, of course, and together with the cabin crew, which helped the passengers to get out, and the responders on the ground that came to the crash site, even though it was in flame and they got burned, they kept helping our passengers to go to a safe place. That's it for me tonight. I wish you a pleasant evening, and I'll see you next time.